What would you think if I told you that some men don't fear death as much as they fear the woman who chooses silence over surrender? This is not about rejection. This is not about games. This is about something far more primal, a confrontation with his own reflection in the dark mirror of feminine detachment. Carl Jung understood this. More than theology, more than philosophy, he studied the battlefield of the unconscious, the place where men and women unknowingly wage war with their own shadows. The question, was Carl Jung Christian, has always hovered like smoke around his legacy. But Jung's real obsession was not doctrine. It was the terrifying mystery of desire, ego, and what happens when the soul is left unanswered. When a woman does not return the call, something ancient ignites in the male psyche. His animus, his projected masculinity, collides with the invisible wall of her silence. And suddenly, he is not chasing her. He is chasing himself. The part of himself he thought she would complete. Most men are not prepared for this confrontation. They are not taught how to handle a woman who disappears into her own inner temple, refusing to play the roles assigned by his ego. He expected her to be an audience. She became a mirror. He expected her to be a confession booth. She became an altar. This is not about cruelty. This is about sovereignty. Some women, perhaps women like you, are beginning to understand the power of sacred distance. Not the cold rejection that wounds a man's pride, but the mystical refusal to rescue him from his own shadows. In this moment, he asks himself, was it love I wanted, or was it ego worship? Did I desire her, or did I desire relief from my own loneliness? Jung would say this is the moment when the projection collapses. The golden aura he painted around her dissolves, and all that remains is the raw terror of seeing his own unmet soul staring back at him. This is why he might spiral into obsession. Not because you harmed him, but because you refused to mother his wound. Jung wrote about Christ as the archetype of the self, the symbol of individuation, sacrifice, and spiritual wholeness. But what modern men often forget is that individuation cannot happen without suffering, without loss, without ego death. So the question was never really, was Carl Jung Christian? The real question is, did Jung understand what happens to a man when he meets a woman who triggers his descent into the underworld of his own unconscious? The answer is yes. Some women, without even trying, become the catalyst for this descent, not because they're cruel, but because they refuse to be possessed. They carry a magnetic mystery, an untouchable essence that dismantles a man's fantasies of ownership. This is why silence, from the right woman, feels like punishment to a man who is not ready to face himself. When you stop calling, when you stop explaining, when you stop chasing the emotional resolution he demands, something awakens in him, a hunger that has nothing to do with you, yet is triggered entirely by your absence. He may call it heartbreak, he may call it betrayal, but beneath the surface, it is the shattering of the illusion that love was supposed to fix him. In Jungian terms, this is the moment when the anima, the feminine image in his psyche, withdraws, and suddenly he stands naked in front of the divine abyss, realizing that no woman can save him from himself. And here's the paradox. That is exactly when a man has the chance to become whole. But not all men take that path. Some will double down on their obsessions. Others will flee into distractions, addictions, or rebound connections. A rare few will choose to sit in the agony long enough to grow. What about you? Do you understand the power of holding space without collapsing into guilt? Can you resist the temptation to rush back in and soothe his discomfort? Because the woman who knows how to detach, without cruelty, without games, but with sacred sovereignty, is the woman who unconsciously teaches him the deepest lesson of all. Love is not about ownership, it is about becoming. And sometimes becoming starts with letting go. Some women hold the keys to this process without even realizing it. They are not here to heal every man they meet. They are not here to absorb his projections or cradle his ego like a fragile relic. They are mirrors, not mothers. And when they withdraw with grace, not anger, not vengeance, but silent knowing, they ignite a crisis inside him that no sermon, no philosophy, no romantic pursuit can resolve. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the shadow, the dark, rejected parts of the self that remain buried until life forces them to the surface. For many men, romantic rejection is not just a personal wound, it is a spiritual fracture. It exposes the parts of them they've been running from: insecurity, abandonment wounds, unresolved grief, and most importantly, the deep, forbidden hunger for a woman to validate their masculinity forever, without question. But life doesn't work that way, nor does love. When you walk away, or worse, when you remain physically present but emotionally detached, you create a spiritual disturbance in the male psyche. He may call it ghosting. He may call it emotional cruelty. But what it really is initiation. Not every man survives it. Some become bitter. Some become predators of affection, always chasing the next soft place to land, the next woman who will temporarily silence the ache. But the man who allows this pain to transform him, he is rare. He is the man who realizes that no woman can give him what he refuses to give himself. Radical self-acceptance and ego transcendence. That's why Jung's work still pierces through modern relationships like a sword of uncomfortable truth. The feminine is not just soft and nurturing. She is also ruthless in her role as the mirror of the masculine unconscious. Consider this. If you constantly soothe him, chase him, or explain yourself in circles, you interrupt his initiation. You become his emotional caretaker, not his equal. But when you embody dignified detachment, when you refuse to return the calls that are rooted in ego and not in soul, you teach him the cost of bypassing his own inner work. Jung understood the difference between religious belief and spiritual transformation. Whether or not he identified as Christian is almost irrelevant compared to what he did teach, that salvation is psychological before it is theological. The Christ archetype in Jung's writings was not merely about worship, it was about crucifixion of the false self, the ego, the persona, and nothing crucifies the male ego faster than the silence of a woman who will not be controlled. That's why detachment is not cruelty. It is spiritual necessity. It creates the sacred space where a man can meet his own God or his own shadow, or both. But there's a warning here, and it's for you. If you detach from a place of resentment, it poisons you. If you withdraw with the secret hope that he will chase you, you are still entangled in his validation. True detachment is not a strategy. It is an embodiment of sovereignty. It is rooted in the knowing that your worth is not dependent on whether he returns, repents, or regrets. This is where women often get caught, believing that distance is a tactic when in fact it must be a way of life. Not coldness, not arrogance, but a quiet refusal to carry what is not yours. So when you think about the man who didn't call back, or the man who begged for one more chance, remember this: you are not rejecting him. You are allowing life to teach him something you never could with words. His growth is not your responsibility. His obsession is not your burden. His regret is not your trophy. It is simply the side effect of meeting a woman who knows how to stand still in her power. The woman who can detach with grace, rather than malice, holds a different kind of magnetism. She does not need to perform. She does not need to convince. She simply exists in her own orbit, knowing that her presence is a gift, but her absence is too. And when a man feels that absence, he is forced to ask himself the question Jung warned about: am I chasing love or running from myself? That question lingers in the silent spaces between connection and disconnection. It's not just about romance. It's about the unbearable confrontation with one's own emptiness, the hollow ache that no partner, no possession, no distraction can satisfy. This is where Carl Jung's deepest lessons unfold, in the quiet crucifixion of the ego. Most men are taught to conquer, to pursue, to win. But Jung knew that true transformation is not about winning, it's about surrender. And nothing forces surrender like the woman who refuses to play the game of endless reassurance. The woman who does not return the call is not cruel. She is simply a symbol of the life he cannot control. To some men, she is the doorway to their own salvation. To others, she is the villain in a story their ego refuses to rewrite. This is the paradox of feminine power. It is not always about giving. Sometimes it is about taking away the role of rescuer, taking away the comfort of projection, taking away the fantasy that she will always be there, no matter how much he neglects his own shadow. When you detach, you become the sacred interruption. You break the pattern he's been living in, a pattern of emotional avoidance, ego-centered love, and unconscious control. In that interruption, something ancient happens. The mythological patterns of man and woman repeat themselves, but with a modern twist. No longer is the woman just the muse or the reward for the hero's journey. She becomes the mirror that forces the hero to face his unfinished work. This is not for the faint of heart. Detachment is a dangerous art because it requires you to give up control too. It requires you to let go of the outcome, to sit in the discomfort of silence without secretly hoping he'll come crawling back. Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. Sometimes the most important thing you can communicate is nothing at all. Your silence is not empty. It's a sermon. It speaks volumes about your self-worth, your boundaries, your refusal to participate in the theater of codependency. But let's be honest, part of you wants him to regret losing you. That's human. That's real. Desire and detachment coexist like twin flames. One burns for validation, the other for freedom. And every woman must choose which fire she's willing to tend. The woman who chooses freedom is playing a different game. She is not the temptress. She is not the martyr. She is the witness. She watches the man unravel in the absence of her emotional labor, knowing full well that his unraveling is part of his rebirth or his ruin. Some men, when faced with detachment, will finally begin the inner excavation Jung spoke of. They will stare into the abyss of their own fears, their own loneliness, and realize they've been trying to outsource their healing onto women. They will step into the work of individuation, not for her approval, but because life has left them no other choice. Others will retreat. They will call her cold, heartless, manipulative, but that says more about their fragility than it does about her integrity. This is where Stoic philosophy overlaps with Jungian thought. Marcus Aurelius taught that the obstacle is the way. Seneca whispered that suffering is not punishment, it is preparation. And Epictetus reminded us that freedom comes not from external control, but from mastering our own reactions. So when you detach from someone Jung would have warned you about, you are not just protecting your peace. You are becoming the obstacle that forces him to face himself. You become the mirror he cannot shatter, the silence he cannot silence, the lesson he cannot outrun. And yes, he may regret losing you, but by then, you'll be far beyond the reach of regret. You'll be walking a different path. The path of the woman who no longer makes her healing dependent on whether or not a man chooses her. Because in the end, it's not about who calls or who stays. It's about who awakens. Some women spend their lives tethered to a man's potential. They stay because they see his higher self in flashes, the tender moment after intimacy, the rare glimpse of vulnerability beneath his armor, the way his eyes soften when he's unguarded. But Jung warned us, potential is projection. We fall in love with who someone could be, not who they consistently choose to be. And that is the trap. When you're entangled with someone Jung would have cautioned you about, you're not just navigating love, you're navigating your own shadow. The part of you that craves validation over truth. The part that chooses attachment over alignment. The part that thinks, if I can just love him enough, he'll transform. But transformation doesn't come from being saved. It comes from being left alone with one's own darkness. When you detach from a man who cannot meet you in the realm of the soul, you do something radical. You stop interrupting his karmic lessons. You step back, and you let the universe teach him what you no longer will. This isn't punishment, this is mercy. Jung believed that love is not about possession. It's about individuation. Two people walking parallel paths, each responsible for their own psychological wholeness. When a man relies on a woman to manage his emotions, to soothe his ego, to distract him from his spiritual void, he's not loving her. He's using her. And too many women mistake this for intimacy. Real love requires separation before it can offer union. Detachment is not the death of love. It's the pruning of illusion. It's the refusal to mother a man's soul while neglecting your own. Some men cannot handle this. They label the detached woman as difficult, cold, too independent. But the truth is, they fear the woman who no longer centers them. They fear the woman who understands desire without dependency. They fear the woman who has made peace with solitude, who would rather sit alone in silence than engage in emotional performance theater. This fear isn't about her. It's about the confrontation she represents. To a man asleep in his shadow, the woman who detaches is like Christ overturning the tables in the temple. She disrupts his comfort. She calls out his false idols. She becomes the sacred mirror he can't control, reflecting his own avoidance back at him. Carl Jung asked a profound question. Do you want to be safe and good, or do you want to be whole? Most relationships are designed for safety, not wholeness. Safety means playing roles, suppressing needs, maintaining comfort zones. But wholeness? Wholeness demands truth. It demands shadow work. It demands standing naked in front of life's mirror, stripped of ego, asking, who am I when no one is here to validate me? This is the core of detachment. When you emotionally detach from someone Jung warned you about, you stop feeding the cycle of projection. You no longer make excuses for their absence, their inconsistency, their inability to meet you where you are. You accept the grief of letting go, not just of him, but of the fantasy you built around him. And yes, grief will come. Grief for the moments that felt real. Grief for the versions of him you saw in fleeting glimpses. But grief is sacred. Grief is cleansing. It burns away the illusions and leaves you raw, real, awake. In that wakefulness, you find power. You realize you don't have to chase closure from someone incapable of giving it. You don't have to hold space for someone who doesn't hold space for you. You don't have to stay small to keep love in the room. Love, when it's real, doesn't require shrinking. It requires expansion. The woman who detaches isn't heartless. She's courageous. She knows that longing is a teacher, but it's not a prison. She knows that solitude is not punishment. It's preparation. She knows that her worth was never meant to be measured by how much pain she can endure for someone else's comfort. So she lets go. Not because she's given up, but because she's waking up. And in that awakening, she reclaims her life from the exhausting tug of war between desire and dignity. She steps into her own power, not to dominate, not to manipulate, but to finally be free. Because the woman who detaches knows a secret Jung whispered long ago: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In the quiet aftermath of detachment, a strange thing happens. A stillness settles over the psyche. At first, it feels like absence, like a room emptied after a storm. No more games. No more chasing texts that never come. No more overanalyzing silences that once kept you awake at 2 a.m. But beneath the emptiness is something deeper, sovereignty. Carl Jung warned of this moment, though few understand its gravity. When a woman stops orbiting a man who cannot meet her, she experiences an ego death of her own. She is forced to confront the parts of herself that once found identity in his approval. She must face the raw question, who am I without this attachment? It's a terrifying inquiry, because most women are conditioned to measure their worth through relational mirrors. The way he looks at her, texts her, chooses her, desires her. But when those mirrors shatter, she is left staring at herself alone, and that's where the real work begins. This is the alchemy of detachment. Not just letting go of him, but letting go of the version of herself who believed she needed him to feel whole. It's a spiritual shedding, a peeling back of layers built from childhood wounds, cultural narratives, and societal expectations. The good girl, the caretaker, the woman who bends so she won't be abandoned. Jung called this the integration of the shadow. The moment when you stop pretending you're only light and finally admit, I stayed too long because I was afraid of my own loneliness. But loneliness is not the enemy. It's the doorway. It's the sacred threshold between the woman you were and the woman you're becoming. To detach from someone Jung would have warned you about is to reclaim your projection. You stop projecting your fantasies onto him. You stop imagining he'll change if you're patient enough, perfect enough, pleasing enough. You stop weaving stories around his silence, his distance, his avoidance. You let his behavior be his behavior. And you let reality be reality. This is what terrifies the ego. It cannot manipulate what it finally accepts. It cannot control what it no longer denies. When you face the truth without flinching, you dismantle the structures that once kept you trapped. Some women will resist this path. They will call detachment cold, selfish, or unloving. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's martyrdom. And martyrdom is the shadow of femininity, not its highest expression. Real feminine power is not about holding a man accountable for your happiness. It's about holding yourself accountable for your peace. It's about understanding that obsession isn't love. It's an addiction to control disguised as devotion. It's about realizing that the feminine mystique isn't about chasing. It's about choosing. Choosing when to open. Choosing when to close. Choosing when to walk away, not in anger but in quiet self-respect. When you detach, you force him to sit alone with the echo of your absence. And if he has any capacity for growth, he will feel the sting of it. Not because you punished him, but because you stopped rescuing him from his own consequences. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when you detach, you stop being his escape hatch. You stop being the soft place he lands after breaking promises he never intended to keep. You stop absorbing the emotional labor of explaining, fixing, forgiving without reciprocity. You simply step back. And in that space, he is left with himself, his patterns, his shadows, his regrets, his reflections. Maybe he'll change. Maybe he won't. But that's no longer your burden to carry. Your burden is to heal, to alchemize the pain of letting go into the wisdom of self-trust, to realize that feminine energy is not passive, it's powerful. It's the force that births, creates, destroys, and renews. It is not about clinging. It is about flowing, about knowing when to hold on and when to release. In this releasing, you step into what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming whole unto yourself, not because you don't desire connection, but because you refuse to lose yourself inside of it. So you choose yourself, again and again and again, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for your own becoming. And one day, without fanfare or announcement, You wake up and realize you're no longer waiting for the phone to ring. You're no longer rehearsing conversations in your head. You're no longer haunted by the ghost of potential. You are free. Freedom, however, does not arrive as a grand parade. It creeps in quietly, like dawn slipping through the cracks of a darkened room. At first, you barely notice it. The absence of ache, the fading of that compulsive need to check your phone, the loosening grip of narratives you once obsessed over. Carl Jung would say this is not just psychological recovery, it is spiritual maturation. When you detach from someone who could not meet you, you do more than just heal heartbreak, you dissolve an outdated identity. The woman who was once entangled in his attention, his validation, his inconsistency, begins to die. And in her place, a new self emerges. One that no longer places her worth in the hands of another human being's unpredictable affection. This is the sacred wound of desire, realizing that what you wanted most may not have been love. It was relief. Relief from loneliness. Relief from uncertainty. Relief from facing yourself fully, without the mirror of male attention reflecting back who you thought you were supposed to be. But when the mirror is gone, you meet the rawest version of you. And in that reflection, you find something rare. The woman who is no longer seduced by half love. The woman who knows silence is an answer. The woman who understands that detachment is not coldness. It is clarity. Carl Jung warned of attachments that mask unconscious projections. He taught that many of our romantic obsessions are not about the other person at all. They are about the shadow parts of ourselves we refuse to own. We assign them to the man. We imagine he holds our worth in his hands. But in truth, we are wrestling with our own fear of insignificance, abandonment, invisibility. Detachment is the antidote because it calls your projection home. You no longer ask, "Why doesn't he see my value?" You ask instead, "Why did I need him to validate it?" And that shift dismantles the inner scaffolding of obsession. Suddenly, you no longer crave his attention. You crave your own evolution. You no longer script conversations in your mind where he apologizes, realizes, regrets. You script instead a life where his absence is not a loss, but a liberation. When you step back, you force the unconscious into consciousness. This is the moment Jung described as the encounter with the self, not the self he defined, but the self with a capital S. The eternal, intuitive, powerful feminine that lives beneath cultural conditioning and personal trauma. She doesn't beg. She doesn't chase. She doesn't diminish herself for proximity to masculine approval. She stands, she waits, she chooses, and she understands that a man who truly desires her does not leave her guessing. He does not send mixed signals. He does not disappear into silence and expect to find her still waiting at the same emotional door. The woman who integrates this lesson becomes magnetic, not because she manipulates, but because she radiates wholeness. Men sense it, even if they cannot articulate why. She has become untouchable in the best way. Not cold, but complete. Not bitter, but boundaried. And here's the paradox that confuses many men. The woman who can walk away is often the most desired, not because she plays games, but because she is not available for unconscious dynamics. She refuses to participate in cycles of hot and cold attention, breadcrumb affection, or emotionally unavailable romance. She knows the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between longing and love, between trauma bonds and soul connections. And so she detaches, not to punish, but to protect her peace, to protect her growth, to protect the sacred energy she now realizes is not for sale at the cost of her dignity. This is the moment he may begin to regret, not because you manipulated him into missing you, but because your silence holds a mirror to his own emptiness. The echo of your absence forces him to confront his shadow, the parts of himself he avoided, by keeping you half close, half distant, half loved. Jung knew this too. He called it the confrontation with the unconscious. Sometimes it happens after a breakup. Sometimes after a woman finally stops answering the calls. Sometimes in the middle of the night when the distractions fade and the soul can no longer hide from itself. But for you, the woman who has chosen detachment, the lesson is complete. You have learned the art of release. You have learned that the person who is meant for you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep them. And so you return to yourself, not as a consolation prize, but as the most powerful love story of all. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.